Glad to have you here. My name is Jane Ramseyer Miller. I am the artistic director for the One Voice Mixed Chorus, Minnesota's LGBT and Allies Chorus, and we are celebrating our 30th anniversary this year, which is really exciting. And I also serve as artistic director for Gala Choruses, which is a network of LGBT choirs across North America, and there are a few in other parts of the world as well.
And I am Erik Peregrine. My pronouns are they, them, or he, him. And I wear a number of hats. Here in Minnesota, I'm the music director for the Woodbury Chorus and Orchestra, as well as the assistant conductor and youth engagement person for One Voice Mixed Chorus. On the East Coast, I serve as the artistic director for Ensemble Compagnie. And I'm going to be moving out to Boston in the summer, which is exciting and sad for Minnesota.
Yeah. So my pronouns are she and her, and I came to this topic over 15 years ago because I was conducting in One Voice Mixed Chorus, and one of our singers came to me and said that they were transitioning, taking testosterone, and asked me what was going to happen to their voice. And I said, It was an entirely new question for me. I got on the internet, I asked colleagues, I went to the library, and I found nothing in terms of information about transitioning voices. And that set me on a personal journey to try to learn and understand what I could. And out of that, we held our first Transgender Voices Festival in 2004, and are really happy to be back for another round with many, many, many more resources than we had back in 2004. So we just want to ask what kind of, well, age is not so important, but how many of you are working with middle school students? And how many high school? And how many adults? Okay, so a lot of adults in there. Great, okay. And how many of you have worked with transgender singers in the past? Many. And how many are currently working with trans singers? Lots. Okay, cool. So we are going to give you lots of detail today. But just know that there are many other workshops that are going to go into further depth on some of these issues, and we'll have lots of time at the end for questions. So stick with us and prepare your questions, because we'll have some nice time for conversation. And I'm going to close the door. Or Katrina can close the door. Thank you.
The frog hat is very All right, so just to get us all on the same page before we start diving in, this is just a broad definition of what transgender means. And broadly speaking, transgender, it's an umbrella term for people whose gender expression or gender identity differ from the conventional expectations given to them based on what gender they were assigned to be at birth. So one of the first experiences that we all have coming out into the world is a doctor picks us up and looks us over and checks an M or an F, and then we are designated either these little lacy pink shoes or these awesome blue Oxfords. And never the twain shall meet. We like flowers or we like grilling, and that's it. And you know, for many trans people, for most trans people, and as well as cis people, those are incredibly constrained categories. So that, you get what the gender binary is. You're here because you get that, and because you want to better help people that are wherever they are in that. So the gender binary, of course, refers to the masculine male, feminine female, bathroom signs with a little dress, or Superman cape, I've heard, versus the pants. So transgender is broadly used as an umbrella term that can encompass many different types of identities. In your booklet for the weekend, there are a bunch of definitions and some terms, so I'll let you look that over at your leisure. Some identities that can be under the transgender umbrella are trans woman, trans man, non-binary, gender queer, gender fluid, agender, and many, many more. Don't feel overwhelmed. That's why we have the glossary. You can look them up. And I am going to go over a couple terms right now. So to speak about where singers and really all trans people are coming from, this is some language that we use. AFAB, AFAB, or AMAD, ANAB. and these refer to assigned female at birth or assigned male at birth. And this helps designate where people are coming from, but also recognizes that it was an assignment. It was not a choice, and it does not necessarily reflect the identity of that person. Non-binary people, like myself, are people who exist outside of the gender binary. We don't fit cleanly into either box. Maybe our gender is something else entirely. Maybe it's bits and pieces of the above. It's just that identity that encompasses existence beyond the two options that are given to us. And then the last term I want to give you is cisgender. And we're now betraying that this is the slideshow that we use for music ed conferences, where the overwhelming majority of teachers that we're speaking to are cis. I believe that this space is different, and that's wonderful. But cisgender refers to basically anyone who's not trans. If you identify with the gender you were assigned at birth, you're cis, good for you, we like you too.
Here's a really important question. We often refer to GLBT, and we put it all together. So the question is being transgender the same as being gay or lesbian? And the answer is no. And I just want to describe those a little bit. So your sexual orientation, so that's the gay, lesbian, bi, straight part, refers to who you're attracted to. And who you're attracted to actually has nothing to do with your gender. So for example, in One Voice, our base section leader is a trans woman. She transitioned at around age 60 and has been married to her wife for 30 years. And just because she transitioned, just because she reconciled her gender presentation, doesn't mean that who she's attracted to has changed. Trans people, they could be gay, they could be straight, they could be lesbian, they could be asexual, just like everybody else. They could be anything in between. So this is the genderbread person. I don't know if you've seen it, but it's kind of a cool little tool. And there are actually lots of different versions of the genderbread. It's a little limited, but in this case, it does sort of describe the differences in these areas that we're talking about. So your gender identity is how you personally identify on the inside. So male, female, genderqueer, non-binary. And then your gender expression is more about how you identify on the outside. So that could be how you wear your hair, how you walk, what clothes you decide to wear. And then there's biological sex. And those are qualities that determines one's sex, like reproductive organs, like genitalia or hormone balances. And then lastly, we have who you're attracted to. And that's the GLB, or asexual or straight part. Make sense? Totally different categories here.
So before we start to dive into some of the nitty-gritties about making your ensembles safer and more welcoming spaces, I want to first ground ourselves in the work that we do as voice professionals. And I want to share this beautiful quote from the American conductor Craig Bella Johnson. When you sing, you announce your existence. Take a moment and just sit with that for a sec. So when we bring our voices into a space, we bring our whole selves. And for trans people, that can come with any number of complications and pains. Our voices may not match what we internally expect them to be. Our voices may not match what the external world has decided is appropriate for our genders. And vocal transition is a huge journey of reconciliation between those things. For some people, it will remain a source of tension throughout our lives. And that tension can be negative, that tension can also be productive. But it's our role as conductors and voice teachers to help guide all of the lyrics, all of the voices, and all of the people whose voices come through them, through that journey, through the music that we provide to our ensembles. So we're going to get into, again, some of the nitty-gritties. It's going to be a lot of details really quickly. Luckily, we have 2 full days of workshops to give you the opportunity to dive more fully into those pedagogical topics, etc. But as we continue, both today in this session and throughout the weekend, continually ground yourself in this reminder that the voice is so profoundly human, and that's what we're teaching.
So there are some very basic ways that you can be supportive of trans singers in your chorus, whatever that chorus looks like. And the first thing is to refer to your sections as, I know this is going to be profound, but soprano, alto, tenor, bass. And it's changing, it's changing. But so many of us are conditioned to refer to ladies and gentlemen, or men and women, or boys and girls. So just be aware that in any section there could be any gender. And there's no need to actually use a gendered label as you're talking to people in your section. And indeed, a singer in a section, their gender identity may shift during the time that they're singing with you. Be aware of pronouns that singers are using. Find ways to ask about pronouns, especially if you're working with youth or adults. Know that a person's pronoun may also shift over that time. So don't make an assumption that because there was a pronoun in one direction one day, that a month later something might be different. Also, when you're bringing in people from the outside, you're working with other clinicians who haven't been to this workshop or who haven't worked with trans singers, make sure that they know your expectation for using gender-neutral language within sections. Make sure you're educating your section leader, your accompanist, anybody that's in that space, so that you're creating a really safe space. So we are not encouraging eliminating gender. What we are encouraging is gender inclusivity. And the best way I can describe this is back to the 1970s for me. I was part of a congregation that was very progressive and decided they were going to use gender-neutral language for God, because all the hymnals said he, right? And so what they did was they eliminated all of the pronouns for God and just used the word God, which I have to say was very boring. And this particular congregation was not progressive enough to refer to God as she or to ever use those kind of pronouns. So it was a way of sort of neutering the divine as opposed to finding a way to really expand our definitions of gender and be much more embracing and inclusive. Does that make sense? Right at the beginning, when you're posting auditions, make sure that you keep language about various voice parts gender neutral. When singers come back to your new season, or if you have a studio and singers are approaching you, you should ask about their pronouns when they enter, and don't make assumptions based on what you see in front of you in terms of what their gender may be and the pronouns that they use. Solo auditions. Make sure that solo auditions are open to people of any gender rather than assuming in terms of the type of song or the lyrics that it needs to be a particular kind of person or a particular gender. And finally, you as a professional can place a rainbow sticker, a trans flag, some kind of symbol in your studio or in your classroom. And believe me, people will see that and they will find that. Even if you don't say anything, that will be a really important symbol and clue that you are a supportive person for singers. Okay, so many of our choirs are gendered choirs. The St. John's Boys Club, I was going to say, Boys Choir. Hallelujah Girls Choir. We have women's choruses, we have men's choruses, right? It's very, very common. And so one of the questions we often get is there a space and a place for gendered choirs as well? Yes, there is, but choirs can also do things like create a title that has nothing to do with gender. The Mellow Divas. I happen to know that gay men can be divas, so that is not a thing. Earth Tones, Valley Voices is a group in the St. Croix here. Lots of schools are taking on their mascot name and connecting that to choir names. Okay, now the question about gendered choirs.
Yeah. So when we talk about men's choirs and women's choirs, we assume that men's choirs are TTBB, and we assume that women's choirs are SSAA. There's a pedagogical place for having choirs that are divided by voice type. There's so much great repertoire for TTBB voices, and so much awesome stuff, especially that's getting published now, for SSAA voices. And I also believe that there's a really powerful community element to having spaces that are single gender based, that are places that men and boys can sing and be vulnerable and have experiences of beauty, and places that women can be together and be empowered. I would suggest, though, that those don't necessarily have to be bound to voicings. So if your pedagogical aim is to teach lower voices, to teach tenors and basses, keep in mind that not everyone in the room is necessarily going to be a male. And the same thing for your SSAA treble choirs. Not everyone in the room is necessarily going to be a woman. On the other side of that coin, if you do have a women's choir and the identity is the guiding force behind that ensemble, make sure that you're actually open to all women. You may have tenors, baritones, basses, women of all voice parts that are seeking that community space. So do the forward thinking on your part to make sure that those spaces can truly be inclusive of the gender identities that they're aiming to serve.
And I am noticing that the music, at least the choral music publishers, are making a shift. So just in this past week, I got an email from, I won't tell you what publisher it is, but it said, repertoire for your boys and girls choir. That was one of them. And then a day later, I got an email from J.W. Pepper, which has completely shifted their website and their emails, and they now say repertoire for your TB chorus or repertoire for your treble chorus. And it just happened. We just happened to notice it about 2 months ago.
Yeah.
So J.W. Pepper is listening, right, and made that shift, which is really, really exciting.
Okay, so again, there's going to be multitudes of sessions later on that go into more specific pedagogical concerns for trans voices, but I'm going to give you a brief lowdown right now. The one most important point to take away is that the effects of testosterone on the larynx are permanent. So for transmasculine and people who are assigned female at birth who begin hormone therapy, our larynxes will, much like cis testosterone puberty, the folds of the larynx will lengthen and thicken depending on the age of the singer and what their instrument is looking like at that particular point in time. Your sopranos and altos that begin testosterone, the voice will drop. How much and exactly what that's going to look like will be very dependent on the individual singer, their instrument, their training, etc., etc. The same is not true for trans women, trans feminine, people who were assigned male at birth and who went through a testosterone puberty and are now pursuing hormone replacement therapy with estrogen. Because the effects of testosterone are permanent, their larynxes will stay the same approximate, the folds will stay the approximate same size and thickness. So your trans women will most likely be singing in their most healthy voices when they're singing in their tenor, baritone, and bass ranges. The larynx is very, very sensitive to hormonal shifts, and so there may be some timbre changes and breath support sorts of things, but by and large, your trans women will be healthiest singing in the tenor, baritone, and bass ranges if they've gone through that testosterone puberty. Something that I hope to see more and more in the future, that we see a little bit of now, is the use of hormone blockers for prepubescent singers as students. And these are exactly what they sound like. They prevent the onset of either testosterone or estrogen puberty around that middle school age that we would typically see those changes start to happen. Hormone blockers are currently rather uncommonly used, and I think that's for a number of reasons. The student has to know that they're somewhere trans-identified and know that they want more time to figure it out. They have to be out to their parents, and their parents have to be supportive. They have to be in a community where they have access to doctors and medical professionals who have experience with transgender medical needs and who know that hormone blockers exist. They have to have the resources or insurance. The list goes on and on of the barriers in the way of trans and gender non-conforming youth receiving hormone blockers. But I think as we gain visibility and as the medical community is more attuned to trans needs, I'm hoping to see them more readily accessible. So those of you who are working with middle school and high school students, just keep that on your radar, that that's something that exists and that may possibly be an option for your students.
Yeah, can you just clarify, hormone blockers are not a long-term, not something you take long-term. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, so they're not a long-term, like Jane literally just said. They're not a long-term option for various medical reasons, but they pause or delay the onset of puberty to give students a little bit more time to figure it out. The exact amount of time that they can be used, it kind of depends. Thank you for commenting.
So then after that point in time, once there's more clarity, then the student would decide, do I want to go on testosterone, do I want to go on estrogen? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Some other aspects of vocal transition to keep in mind for your singers. If your singers were assigned female at birth and potentially have gone through estrogen puberty, many of us find our chests to bring our bodies into closer alignment with ourselves. And that is great for us because of the comfort that it brings in terms of presentation to the world. And it's not so good for us as teachers of singing because the ribs are constricted. There are a couple different types of binders that are used. Some of them come halfway down, so they only constrict the top half of the rib cage, and there's still room for lower expansion for the diaphragm to drop and expand and all of that stuff. That's the kind that I would recommending to your singers for all those breath sorts of concerns. There are also full torso binders that constrict the whole torso like you might expect, which are much more difficult to get that healthy lung expansion with. A lot of young trans folks bind their chests with ace bandages as their first adventure into exploring themselves and their bodies. And I cannot strongly enough tell you to help them not do that. Ace bandages are designed to continue to constrict as they are pushed against. So if you're breathing and your ribs are pushing against the bandage, it will get smaller and smaller and smaller. People have broken ribs and had some long-term injuries due to binding with ace bandages. So if you know that your students are doing that, please let them know that it is potentially very dangerous.
And how would you approach that conversation?
It depends on your individual relationship with your student.
Yeah, I mean,
and I will say, people don't seek out ace bandages because they want to hurt themselves. It's because they want to feel more comfortable in their own skin, and it may be the only option that they have. So approach that conversation very sensitively, and with the knowledge that this is something that can do long-term harm to the students that you're serving. A couple other considerations to keep in mind. Your treble singers that take testosterone are going to have to learn to read bass clef.
It's horrible.
It's horrible.
What is wrong with that clef?
And so if they don't play piano or another instrument, that may be a serious sticking point for them. So be patient and kind, laugh along with them. Another thing to keep in mind, particularly for singers who have started testosterone, but also for some trans women, redeveloping muscle memory can be a huge thing. So I trained in my undergrad for 4 years as a contralto and had a really, really strong sense of where pitches lay in my voice and what I physically needed to do to create the sound that I was after. And then I started testosterone, and that all left. So it's really an adventure, as some of you in this room may know, or those of you who are cis men who went through the lovely middle school boy choir sorts of years. Because everything is shifting, all of the muscle memory that you've developed just completely goes away. It can be very difficult and stressful to figure out how to sing what's in your head, especially when you have really, really strongly developed muscle memory of what that should be. So be patient and help coach your singers through and be that rock that they can lean on. It will get better. The last thing I want to talk about here, and again, this is covered in several sessions later, is the desire to sing in a range that's unhealthy for your singer. So as I talked about, the relationship of voice and gender is a very complicated one. And there are times throughout all of our lives that I think we all wish we sang a different part. But when the bottom line is, as conductors, as choral educators, and as teachers of singing, our responsibility is to help our singers sing in the healthiest, most sustainable way possible through the course of their whole lives. And that means honoring what the physical instrument of the singer is, and helping the singer develop that in a way that will carry them through the course of their lives. We're developing lifelong singers. This can be particularly challenging for trans women, as I mentioned earlier, who are most likely going to continue to sing in tenor, baritone, and bass ranges as their most healthy vocal placement. Some of them may want to sing soprano and alto. Depending on their background and their training, they may have really strongly developed falsettos, and you may be able to coach them to continue to sing in a higher range that is still really sustainable for them. But chances are the lower ranges are going to be the healthiest. And that's a very individual and very challenging conversation to have. That, again, sessions we'll talk about later, so I don't want to get us too far off course now. But have that in your mind. These are really sensitive issues that for us need to come down to vocal pedagogy with compassion for the experiences of the people who we're teaching.
Constant attire. So I know this is an issue for probably every chorus, right? Adult, youth, middle school, whatever. Constant attire is a big, big issue. But we encourage you to examine whatever requirements you have for constant attire. And if possible, make sure that they are not gender specific. So for example, forcing singers into a gender specific kind of attire can really be devaluing of their particular identity. It communicates sort of an indifference to this spectrum and to people who live in the middle of this spectrum. Making people choose, for example. And it's really boring. I mean, think about how creative we could be. I mean, look at this. Isn't that creative?
This is a joke.
I was surfing the internet and you can find everything. Okay, but look at this variety. So this is a women's chorus. They identify as a women's chorus. And they have kind of a nice uniform look, and yet each person in this chorus is able to sort of express themselves with their own choice of a scarf, in this case. This is one voice mixed chorus. We have had years and years of conversation about what to wear. And what this chorus wears right now is every singer can determine what kind of black they want to wear. It just has to match the same color. But it can be any style of clothing as long as it's long-sleeved and as long as their legs are covered. And then there's a scarf that just gives a little bit more uniformity to the look. But this way, people of any gender can choose what they're comfortable in and what they want to wear.
All right, so let's talk about repertoire. Especially for our SSAA and TTBB ensembles, the repertoire available to us typically reinforces some pretty hardcore stereotypes. We've got this awesome arrangement of What Do We Do with the Drunken Sailor for TTBB voices versus He's Gone Away for SSAA. The rollicking, strong sea shanty, what do you do with it? He's gone away. To this light, floaty love song to this man. I'm not judging, but I'm judging.
He was probably a jerk anyway.
So as choral educators, as conductors and teachers of singing, one of our responsibilities is to present our singers with learning opportunities and perspectives that run the whole gamut of human expression. And if we're sticking to our women sing flower songs and our men sing pirate songs, that's really harmful, both in terms of what it reinforces for those particularly if you're working with young singers, but it reinforces for them. But it also, it typecasts us in ways that I think we can all agree are not the healthiest way of being human. So repertoire is an opportunity to both actively challenge that and program across gender expectations, programming soft, floaty love songs for your TTBB and male voices, and really powerful, strong repertoire for your treble voices. The piece that comes immediately to mind, some of you may know Carol Barnett's Song of Perfect Propriety. If you don't, look it up on YouTube. It's SSAA and piano, SSA, 3-part treble and piano, and it's all about being a pirate on the rollicking high seas versus the expectations of the Victorian woman. So it's super powerful. You can also, I think particularly this Alice Parker Robert Shaw arrangement is brilliant and certainly has a place in our repertoire. And in our classroom, when we program in those traditionally stereotyped gender sorts of ways, that's an opportunity to have a conversation with our singers about what about this resonates with you versus what about this do you find oppressive. It's all about finding a balance and about having the conversation of, yes, this is a gendered thing, and how does that relate to us as humans, as singers, as musicians. The other thing I want to make sure that I mention is that you can't be what you can't see. So please program repertoire by people who are not dead white men, whom I love, and who are not trying to make a living making music. Program music by women and trans composers and queer composers and composers of color. There's so many brilliant, brilliant pieces out there just waiting for you to unfold. This is also a shameless plug for my session that comes immediately after this in here. I'll be doing a reading session of 2 trans composers for a variety of voice types, primarily SATB, but also some others. So stick around if you'd like some physical resources to walk into your classroom.
And I'm just going to jump in and give an example. So ACDA, this was, when was this, 6 months ago, posted a bunch of recommended repertoire in their Choral Journal, and the vast majority were by white men. And so I posted something about exactly on this topic, finding more diverse composers, diverse music to perform. And one person posted back and said, I only program on choral quality. And which was just such an interesting response. And I program on choral quality too, actually. But just to say, this does take more work. Like, it's really easy to go find that music that we all grew up on. That's easy. But this other music is out there. It just means finding the places, we're going to talk about this a little bit later, but finding some of the places where they're listed. There are all kinds of websites of women composers. There are websites of queer composers. We're working on trans composers. But do the research, do the work. It is so worth it.
Usually when we hear about that repertoire of quality, it's referring back to the pieces that we all learned when we were doing our music ed degrees and our conducting degrees. And those are the pieces that have been enshrined because of various hierarchies of power, which is not to take away from their value and their value as teaching tools, but just to recognize and honor that they were taught to us because they are what our teachers were taught and our teachers' teachers were taught because of all of the classes of power that go into that. So keep that in mind as you're programming. There's plenty of brilliant, brilliant music out there that is high quality, that may not be on your radar because it isn't by a straight white system.
And while we're improvising, there are ways to take those dead white guys also and work them into a program that is more inclusive. So you were just reminding me, we did a concert of Brahms a number of years ago. And I took one of, I don't remember which one it was, from the Liebeslieder waltzes, but it's an SSAA piece, and it talked about hiding your love. And we set it up in terms of the experience of a lesbian woman being forced to hide in the closet. So there are also ways to kind of take and reshape and reform some of the music that is really beautiful to sing and lovely for our choirs to learn to know. Okay, so this little slide was inspired by teachers from another workshop who asked some really great questions about what to do when we're touring. And this is very relevant for youth. It's also relevant for adults. If you have an adult chorus and you need to figure out who's going to sleep with who when you're on tour.
Share a room.
Oh, sorry. Bad word. Okay. So this particular conversation right here is about youth. And how to navigate that, because often guardians and parents are involved in these conversations as well. But the most important thing to know is that you start with the youth. Don't start with the parents, don't start with an entire classroom, but ask them what they are most comfortable with. And then once that's sort of figured out, talk with the parents about in that way, so everyone's on the same page. You don't need to make a general public announcement. But make sure that people within that space know what's going on and are comfortable. It's also important to know what your own school or organization's policies and guidelines are, maybe to work creatively around them or with them, but make sure you are clear on what those policies are. And the best thing is, we have found in these sessions that music teachers have really great creative ideas. So if you are stuck, and you don't quite know how to navigate a situation, there are lots of great places you can post on Facebook and ask a question like this, and you'll get really great answers back. Okay, microaggressions. So if you're not familiar with the term microaggression, a microaggression is essentially when you make a statement that is hurtful without meaning to, or because you forgot something. And the first thing you need to know in messing around in this muddy conversation is that you are going to make mistakes. Erik and I have been having these conversations for years and years and years, and we make mistakes. So you may make mistakes about pronouns, about someone's name, for example. And when you make a mistake like that, know that you don't need to spend a lot of time apologizing. Just acknowledge that you made a mistake and move on. You don't need to bring your own crowd into this conversation. Just move forward. So ouch and oops is up here as an example of something that has emerged out of our LGBT youth courses. And this is a little tool that they use for microaggressions. So for example, if they're in a circle or in a room and something happens and someone is insulted by something that's said in that space, they can respond by saying, ouch. And the person who delivered that comment can listen and say, oops, as a way of saying, oh, I screwed up, sorry about that, and then they move on in the conversation. It doesn't solve every issue, but it's a way to just acknowledge and bring to the forefront those kinds of microaggressions that occur. And it's a great way to educate the rest of the people in the room as well. Now, obviously, there are some times when an ouch and oops may happen, and a conversation needs to happen later on, right, in more depth. But this is just a good tool and something that any age group can sort of use and work with. And the other important thing is to never out a singer. It is their life, it is their choice. If you are a voice teacher or a music teacher, you may have developed a very, very close relationship with a trans or gender non-conforming singer. And they may have come out to you, which is beautiful. But they may not be out to their family. They may not be out to their friends or the rest of the people in school. So just be aware that because you have this information doesn't mean that everyone else does. There are ways that this can be really, really important. So for example, a concert's coming up, and you know there is a trans student that's come out to you. It's really important to check in with them and say, what name would you like to have in the concert program? Because that's a very public space. And you might have a parent-teacher conference. So you might check with them and say, what pronoun would you like me to use when we're in your parent-teacher conference? Unless safety is an issue, it is not your job to come out for any kind of individual.
So we're gonna get a little real for a sec. One of the things that Jane and I run into a lot working with One Voice are people saying, "You've got marriage equality. What else is there? You're good, right?" And these are some statistics from a 2015 National Climate Survey that I want to share with you, just to reinforce that that is unfortunately not the case. 98% of LGBTQ+ students regularly hear homophobic and transphobic slurs in their schools.
85% of LGBT students experience verbal harassment.
75% of trans students feel unsafe at school because of their gender identity or expression.
64% of LGBT students who reported harassment said that school staff did nothing in response and told the student just to ignore it.
Don't be that person.
The good news is we have all kinds of new resources, and they are readily available, and many of them are free. So in July, the Minnesota legislature passed this Minnesota Toolkit for ensuring safe and supportive schools. It is available. You can Google it and download it online. An organization here called genderspectrum.org has a bunch of resources as well. And this book just came out this fall called Teaching Respect and Inclusive Pedagogy for Choral Directors. So all of those resources are available for your use. GLSEN, the Gay, Lesbian, Straight Education Network, has a project called the Safe Space Kit. Again, the curriculum, discussion tools, again, a free tool that you can download online. And then Gala Choruses, which again is a network of LGBT choruses across mostly North America, but somewhat beyond, has all kinds of resources for you as vocalists and choir directors. But this one particular section is all about transgender voices. And these web links that we just gave you are on here. There's a section in this little green, if you click on the green bar there, called Transgender OneonOne. It has some of the terms and definitions that Erik talked about. There's a whole section that we're expanding called Tools for Teachers. And the third section down there are some video resources, warm-up exercises for transgender singers to work at range extension and keeping a healthy voice. Things about gender and inclusive language are here on this particular site. So just a wealth of information. That's galachoruses.org. And after this festival, when we compile all these videos, they will live on this site. And you will have a chance as teachers or voice coaches or trans individuals to go in and watch the videos, learn and work with some of the techniques that we're teaching this weekend at our festival. Tips for allies of transgender people, really important. Come out as an ally. In terms of your language, in terms of creating visually spaces that trans people know that you are an ally. Oh, I just said that. Post symbols around your space. Don't make assumptions about anyone's gender or their sexual orientation. Two different things, remember that? Understand that identity can happen at any age. This isn't just something that happens to middle school students. It can happen at any age of adulthood as well. And there is no right or wrong way to transition. It's different for every individual. Don't ask a transgender person what their real name is. Don't ask about a person's genitalia, surgical status, or sex life. Not your business, not our business. Challenge anti-transgender remarks or jokes in public spaces, really important. That's just such an important part of standing up. Don't let it happen. Support gender-neutral restrooms in whatever space you work in. It could be a church like this, it could be a school, it could be a business, but make sure you're advocating for those. And know your own limits as an ally. Don't be afraid to admit when you don't know something. Ask questions. Like I said, if you're speaking with a trans person, you might say, is it okay if I ask this? And leave some space. Some people will be really Katrina, for example, will answer anything you ask her.
I'll tell you what my real name is.
All right.
It's
That is
Katrina.
fair. Thank you for that clarification. So just know that everybody comes from a different place.
But most importantly, like any student that you're working with, any singer, the most important thing is to build a trusting relationship with your trans singers. As music professionals, as music teachers, we exist in a really unique space where we can help people come into their own. And how beautiful is it that for trans singers, music gets to be part of that journey for them. So as scary as it can seem, never lose sight of that joy. It's a really, really wonderful thing. So thank you for being here and for being willing to walk with your singers on that road.
Your time. We just threw a lot at you.
Yeah.
Yeah, in fact.
I don't know, I just wanted to make one small comment about.
And can you stand
Oh,
so
sure.
we can all hear you really well?
I just wanted to make a small comment about coming out as an ally. I actually wouldn't recommend that because I know I've had experiences with self-proclaimed allies who then do something or say something problematic and then kind of double down when they're called out on it. I would honestly just recommend that you show through your actions and what you say and what you do that you're willing and open to learn. I don't think you need to come out as an ally, and I think it can be problematic for people who've been burned by people who say they're allies and then don't follow through on that. Just because allyship is something that you do, not something that you perform or that you are. So that's all I wanted to say. And I thought it was a really good presentation.
Thank you for saying that.
One thing on pronouns is also on reference. And a lot of people forget those. So that if you're saying, I raise my hand and the director's saying, what do you think about the dynamics of measure 24? And the director answers and say, yes, sir. And that's really not what you should be doing. And it's a really easy mistake. I've got my church director, always gets alto and tenor right, but he just can't quite get the yes, sir out of the system. And because it's past conducting school. It's way before that. So just something to think about.
It's actually someone's cultural conditioning about how to be polite.
Exactly.
And then they're trying to be, and then suddenly being polite that isn't polite anymore.
Yeah.
So it's like.
I just say, yes ma'am. Yes ma'am. And it's getting better.
We were at a trans-focused opera, I don't know, a couple weeks ago, and I mean, this is totally a space that is a conversational space about gender, and the facilitator of the conversation with the audience called on people as yes sir, yes ma'am, and afterward I just gently talked to him. To me, that's sort of coming out as an ally, right? And I said, I have made so many mistakes as a cis person, but here's a good example of a way that you could have just avoided using gender at all when you're calling on people in the audience. And he just gave me this blank look and he said, well, what would I do? And I said, well, you could say the person in the red shirt. Or you could say, I mean, there's just so many options. But we just get conditioned.
Yeah.
I work privately with competitive and professional singers, and I'm wondering if you have any advice because my transgender students want to compete professionally, and much of the professional world is gender binary. And so even though I have a more expansive attitude toward it, and I know in terms of pop singing is a little bit easier as well, in the classical and musical theater world, do you have any advice for that?
That's a great question. Erik, why don't you take
That's
it?
not. Let's talk after that. That's not really the world that I live in as a choral conductor, but there's several voice teachers here that do. So
Well,
Liz,
we have time, so maybe, do you have some responses to that?
Sure. Hi, I'm Liz. There are some up-and-coming opera singers who are doing really great revolutionary work. Lucia Lucas, I think, is debuting as the first transgender woman in America this year. Holden Madonna is working in Germany. There are lots of folks who are kind of paving the way and pioneering the classical classical world for singers. Choosing repertoire that has themes around transfiguration, transformation. Art song is a great genre to play with in terms of classical singing. And I think that we are making moves toward making competitions a little less gendered, thankfully. So things are happening slowly. Some folks are out there doing the work, so let's talk more, but it's happening, which is good.
So my guess is in the music theater world, it would be easier for a trans man or a trans woman, someone who identifies as gender non-binary. I mean, that might be a real struggle. I mean, musicals. I was trying to find a musical the other day that wasn't highly gender focused, and I mean, they barely exist. We need some more people. Write some musicals. Yeah, I think that's a real puzzle. That's a real, yeah.
I mean, this is wonderful, and I just think, like, what about all of our colleagues? I mean, I'm a high school teacher, and there's like 4 of us here today, right? And so how do we get, and maybe you're sort of the advocates of this, is like at a state conference or whatever, that is the place to do that or not, I'm not really sure, but there's just so much to unpack for all of us like stupid cis people about this issue, to honor students where they are, and then maybe an additional question on that is, like, there are so many kids where this isn't, I have a friend in New York who teaches voice in the Bronx, and it's like, these are kids that can't even reckon with their gender identity because they have so many other things going on. So, like, this is kind of a lovely first world problem too, and I don't know if you have any additional comments on those things.
I think every singer's walking in with their own intersectional history and personhood. So I don't think there's ever a hierarchy of when we deal with what issues.
Sure.
It's going to depend on the singer and where they're at in their life and where just them, their spirit. In terms of educating colleagues, invite us to your state conferences. I think we've done several music ed and choral conducting specific conferences, and it's wonderful to be able to talk to a lot of educators in the same room. We've also been doing a lot of work with pre-service teachers that are in the last couple of years of their university programs before they go and do their student teaching. So we're hoping to catch the next wave of teachers before they enter the classroom, but we want to talk to everybody. And I think, you can chime in too, but I think speaking at state conferences has been profoundly changing.
And Erik is going to be presenting at Chorus America this summer, which is awesome. And you know, you can advocate at your events for this kind of workshop. So for example, there is another choral organization who recently had an event, and the topic was diversity and inclusion or something, and we submitted this workshop and it didn't get chosen, and I was like, really? I mean, so people need to ask them. I think the event had a lot of submissions and it just wasn't deemed important. So you all can make sure that the organizers know that it is important. Sue Zemlin here, who's worked for years and years with ACDA Minnesota, has been very instrumental. For example, I mean, here's an example of one person that has really influenced getting a lot of these workshops publicly throughout Minnesota. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Lorraine. I have 2 choirs, one of which is LGBTQ, and about half of our singers are trans, and the other of which is a bunch of doctors. And the doctor choir isn't rehearsing this summer, and so I was thinking about asking my choir if they would feel comfortable letting a bunch of straight cis people into our space just for the summer, because there's people who want to sing. And so I'm wondering if you 2 have different answers about this. I'm not sure. So how do I approach the queer choir that I conduct and ask them about their ideas and their safety? And then how do I approach anybody else coming into that space?
You first.
No.
You started it.
I have a really clear opinion about this one. So, I do think it is important to ask the chorus, but if they are all open to it, yay, rah. I mean, what a better way to teach and educate and influence cis people,
students.
right?
Yeah,
Men students,
that's
that's awesome. It is. So, for example, in One Voice, that's the chorus here, we started as a gay and lesbian chorus, like gay men and lesbians, that's all it was. And in the beginning, they barely talked to each other. And then, after a few years, a few trans people started to come out. There weren't any gender binary, just trans people. And bi people started being more visible. And then it started expanding like this. And we, by educating ourselves internally and by people speaking out and taking a brave stand, we just became more inclusive. And then in Minnesota, when the whole marriage amendment thing happened, a whole bunch of straight people started to join us. And I remember when the first time a straight man ran as president of our board of directors. And it was like, ooh, and then he was elected, and it's like, oh, he's doing a great job. So we did a survey. I mean, I don't know who's straight and who's gay and who's, you know, I mean, I just don't know. But we did a survey a number of years ago and found out that 29% of our singers identify as straight. And I just didn't have a clue. And we are a richer and more beautiful community because the straight allies are singing with us. What would you say?
I think it really depends on the individual queer chorus.
Yeah.
As you know, the trans chorus rehearsals for this festival are a trans and non-binary and gender non-conforming only space. And that's to preserve a space where we can be present in our bodies and our voices without the pressure of being observed. And I think that that's really important for this particular festival in this context. It depends on what, I would say it depends on the chorus particularly, and what they have wanted from that experience. If it has been explicitly a queer-only space, then I think that's a bigger conversation about whether there's some way that you can still preserve that spirit while welcoming allies in, and how important that haven is to the members of that organization. I also have a very nebulous answer, which is perhaps not that helpful for you. But coming back to the spirit of the organization, and whether it would better serve that spirit to bring friends in for a summer versus to preserve that space over the summer.
Well, and one of the unique advantages you have here is it's temporary. So, I mean, that's really interesting as opposed to just opening up wide forever.
Yeah.
I've got a question I'm just curious about, because I have a preconception that I think you would be valid. Are both of them SAT requires?
They are, yeah.
I'm moving progress. Okay, so there would have to be a little bit of education about pronouns.
Yeah, so we
So that
do,
would not.
with the doctor choir, we did pronouns at the beginning, and then they were all cis identifying. Again, we don't really know. And with quorum, we do pronouns every now and again, just refresher for everybody. So
That's not, I was just curious.
yeah, we do
All of a
make
sudden, I
times.
had this mental image of LGBT choir and a bunch of men doctors. And I said, wait a minute, what did you just do to yourself? And I didn't want to ask. So.
Yeah, no. The med student choir is mainly there are more sopranos and altos who identify as women than there are tenors and basses who identify as men.
Katrina, would you answer this question any differently?
No, I'm just curious. I just was
Yeah.
noticing something about myself. I made a stupid assumption about that.
Oh, about the doctors,
Yeah, and I have a female doctor. So
Yeah.
it makes no sense to do that.
How do you approach divorcing the concept of SATB from gender?
Can you say more about that?
Typically, I mean, historically, right? Right. What did you do? Dead right. SATB is a binary designation in most traditional musical cultures. And so how do you approach divorce? And I mean, Minnesota is a hugely queer state, and traditionally queer state. Like, how do you approach that? This isn't about, gender.
Well, I want to challenge that idea of tradition, because if you think about the English cathedral choral school, that's all men and boys, and it's SATB. If you pull back our dead white friend Vivaldi, who was teaching at an orphanage for women and girls, he was writing SATB music that they think was all sung by women, including cis female basses. So I think that, yes, in the current modern contemporary choral, whatever you want to call it, the idea is soprano, alto women, tenor bass men. But it's much, I think that is an oversimplification. And just calling that what it is, I think, can go a long way. You may have men who are countertenors and falsettists who sing in soprano and alto ranges. I'm thinking of some of my dear women in one of my community choruses who are tenors and baritones because they have gone through menopause and the balance of hormones in their larynx has shifted, and now they have these rich lower voices. So really anyone of any gender and any gender history may end up in any voice part. I think that's one of the really beautiful things about SAT repertoire, is while there is that expected divide, it's much more open in a lot of ways than SSAA or TTB choirs have been in the past. Does that kind of get at what you're saying?
Yeah, I like the traditional perspective of utilizing the Baroque period for that.
I mean, there's nothing in the words soprano, alto, tenor, bass that is connected to gender. So, I mean, as far as I know, in terms of the history of the...
That's pretty hard transpose in Portland, Oregon, and how our gender affirming choir handles it. We have voice 1, voice 2, voice 3, voice 4 if needed, but usually it's just 3. We ask our choir members to, work within whichever voice works best for their voice. And we have choir members during concert that will move to different voices depending on the song and the range that they're able to do.
Who's that too?
I was going to add that I think having role models helps, like bringing up composers who wrote vocal parts, or like listening to some Sweet Honey and Rock.
Yes.
And also, I was a part of a queer choir in Austin where we just did away with those traditional parts when we had 2 parts, because it was also open to everybody, even if they had no musical experience, and we just called them tops and bottoms.
Nice. Excellent. Are we done? Oh, yeah.
Like, I just was curious. There's been tons of research for the middle school male voice, and that has there been with the advent of testosterone treatment any research into how that voice transitions? Is there stages, kind of like Paul Cooksey talked about stages? Has there been any research that?
Yes. The short answer is it's really similar in most cases.
Okay.
The long answer is we have sessions all about it.
I have to leave after lunch.
1:30 this
So yes, and you're going to learn all about it later.
So there's a session particularly on transmasculine voice and a session on transfeminine voice. There's some public voice coaching, so you can sit in and watch a voice teacher work with both masculine and feminine voices. And then there's a session on non-binary voices, which also will be really interesting. Lots of stuff.
So are some of those the ones that are being videotaped because we have to take the kids back to us?
Yes. They both the transmasculine and transfeminine workshops are videotaped.
Yeah.
Question about research. So I think oftentimes in queer spaces and in radical musical spaces, there can be a simultaneous expectation of creating a space for someone to express and find a voice and be yourself, and also to be a social justice advocate or warrior, right? So in creating Resonate, almost as soon as we started, we had media inquiries, we had research inquiries, and it was really difficult for our choir, certainly being so young, to be comfortable walking into that space.
Yeah.
So the challenge, I think, for us as educators is knowing that the research is burgeoning but still very incomplete.
Yeah.
And then in order to provide more information, there's sort of a necessary exposure of experiences and identities. How do you come across that conversation with the folks that you work with? How do you approach that? What do you say to the people who are asking for information? What do you say to the people who would be giving that information? How do we start to work that a little bit more efficiently?
I gratefully have not had to directly deal with that yet, so I'm going to pass that to Jane.
We definitely, if I understand what you're asking, we definitely dealt with that in planning this conference, for example, because we were trying to find safe spaces for trans singers, and we were also bringing in lots of cameras, and those two are really opposite things. So we tried to find, find a middle ground and create some spaces that had no cameras and had no cis people, and also open it up as much as possible, because filming and taking these resources out to teachers who can't be here felt, teachers and trans singers I should say, felt really important as well.
Yeah.
So I think finding that balance is really important. There is a woman here, I think her name is Ann Michaels, from the Trans Chorus of LA, and she's doing a workshop, I don't know when it is, today or tomorrow, dealing with some of these issues about how do you deal with, because she's in LA, right? And they've been put into the public eye. But look for that workshop, because I think she's going to deal with exactly some of these topics.
I'm moderating.
But you're moderating. Great.
I think we should probably wrap it up.
All right. We're around. So enjoy lots of other sessions. Come chat with us if you have questions.